Howdy and welcome back to the channel. Project we have going on now is another walnut cutting board similar to the one I built in the previous video. So the other day I went to the lumber yard and picked out some walnut, the best I could find that didn't have a lot of curves along the edge or bowing, as straight as possible, and also boards that didn't have defects running up all along down the length of the board. I don't know what the grain looks like because these are all still rough sawn, but we'll see what that looks like once I start joining and planing these boards and cutting them up. And also on this build, I'm using strips left over from the previous cutting board to help make this project. So let's get going and get this thing built. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this and to keep up to date with the shenanigans I'm causing out in my shop. If you watched a couple of my previous videos, you know one of the first steps that I always do after getting my lumber set up is doing the rough cuts. You know, just getting everything cut down to about 4.5 inches longer than they need to be, you know, to have extra waste for snipe once I start plating everything. And some of these boards have a little bit of tension in them, and so my miter saw is having a little bit of trouble on some of these wider pieces to cut through them, but we got it and got everything cut down to rough length. Now that everything has been cut down to rough length, it's time to rip these boards down to a rough width. And I'm shooting for about 2¼ inches on these strips here. And that's so once I start joining them, I have plenty of wiggle room later on when I plate them down to final thickness. I don't have to worry about accidentally overshooting it, trying to get the boards all flat and even due to uneven surfaces. Now that we have all of our strips cut to rough width, it's time to start running them across the joiner to flatten one face of each strip and flatten one edge to give a perfect 90 on one side. That way later on when we start gluing it up and running it through the planer, I have a relatively flat surface to work with. That way my piece doesn't come out all squirrely. Now the joiner and planer phases, they are a lot of repetition in there, so I just did short video clips and trimmed them up to get them down to about a minute or so, but you get the idea. You don't need to see the whole thing in its entirety. Now that we have all of our pieces planed down to same thickness and flat on both sides, it's time to start gluing everything up. As you can see there, I tried to use a spreading stick and then my finger to do that initial glue up, but that failed, so I had to hunt down a brush because my old one broke on me. But anyways, moving on. The cutting board had to glue up into two separate halves. That way they can both fit through the planer after they were dried and get planed down to their 2-inch thick required measurement. And got this first half done. Now I'm working on the second one. If only I can move that fast in real life doing glue up. That sure would save me a lot of time. Alright, now that both panels have had a couple of days to dry and fully cure, it's time to run them through the planer. Now before I started doing this, I took a chisel and gently scraped off the dried up beaded glue that was on top and bottom of each panel before running it through the planer. That way the blades wouldn't be taking that hard hit trying to cut off all that excess glue and messing them up. Now it didn't take very long at all to get them down to 2-inch thick each. Sure didn't make a lot of shavings though. My little vacuum was stocked full of that stuff. And like the previous cutting board, they wanted a roundover edge on it. So I set my bit up in the router and got to work on that. But I ran into a little problem. As you can see, the cutting board wanted to start moving around on me. So I got tired of that shenanigan and took 4 Kreg screws, shot them through the top of the workbench, which basically acted like a vise and held the cutting board in place while I took the router to it. Worked out pretty good. Gotta do what you gotta do to get the job done. Now it's time to start routing in the juice or blood groove. But before that happens, you have to set up a jig in order to be able to properly route in the groove, keeping it even all the way around and not having it messed up and squirrely on you. So what I did here is I cut previously from the blast cutting board 1.5-inch spacers, which you saw me put down on the bench next to the cutting board, and then built the frame up around it. And I used some screws to hold everything in place and lock it down to keep the board from moving as I was applying pressure with the router, cutting everything out. Had to use a little shim there in the corner to keep it from moving a slight little bit. Tapped it in and everything was ready to go, and just started taking real shallow passes, about 1/32 of an inch on each one, and just kept going and going until I hit 3/8 of an inch deep on the juice groove. And now that everything has been routed and ready to go, it's time to jump to the most exciting part of this project. Sanding. Right. I hate sanding. It sucks, but it's a necessary evil. Someone asked me, how come you don't record the entire sanding process? Because it is long, boring, and long. Now, on to my actual favorite part of any cutting board build, and that is applying the mineral oil and getting that nice and rubbed in, because that's where the money shot is, and you just see the board just come alive with the vibrant colors of each strip of wood that's in there. Helps give the board each unique look to it, and just makes it stand out among everything else. Now the top side has a lot going on. And side note, the little orange cones I'm using there, they're painter's cones when you're painting panel doors and such. They work great on instances like this because it allows even airflow and helps everything dry a whole lot better. And you can see right there all that sapwood just popping out as that oil hit it as I'm rubbing it in. This board turned out very beautiful by the time it was all said and done.